Film versus analytics. Welcome back for another episode. I am Brett Whitefield. I am the film expert and COO of FantasyPoints.com. I'm going to be joined by Scott Barrett, the CEO and analytics expert. We are going through all of the rookie prospects and breaking them down battle style, film versus analytics. Welcome to the floor, Scott Barrett. Scott, how are you doing today, sir?
You kind of queued this up like we're gonna go to war, where really hasn't been that so far.
Well,
It's been kind of
so
just
maybe I'll talk about that because we'll go to war eventually, but right now we kind of agree on everything.
yeah, it's
So
it's about to get interesting maybe 3 players from now.
yeah, yeah, I'll have to start
Well, that's what the
adding.
people want.
Yeah,
The
that is what they want. We'll
I'm Skip Bayless, you're Stephen A. Smith.
like when we get, especially like in the early round two stage, Scott, like when we're going like Xavier Leggett versus
Adonai
Keon
Mitchell,
Coleman versus
Ricky
Adnan
Purcell.
Mitchell. Yeah, you and I, we might have to get boxing gloves on, right? I mean, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
this is going to be interesting. But anyways, today we're talking about LSU wide receiver Malik Nabers, who this guy, it's interesting, Scott, because you know, call it the term I hate, prospect fatigue or what, but for whatever reason, people are elevating him above Marvin Harrison Jr. a lot. Where we're seeing that more and more these days. I'm not quite there, but I do think Malik is a heck of a prospect. I'm really curious to see where he lands for you analytically. I know his profile from 2023 is pretty exceptional, so I'm sure he's very favorable in your model, Scott. Hit me.
Yeah, so before manual adjustment, so just like first pass of my model, it said Malik Nabers was not only wide receiver 1 in this class, but one of the top 5 best wide receiver prospects of this past decade. It was him, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Devonta Smith, and AJ Brown. Top 5 best analytics profiles in the class.
That's good company.
Yeah, yeah. Best single season in the class, 100 plus yards in 9 of his last 10 full games. Easily the best age adjusted profile in the class. But he fell behind Marvin Harrison Jr. in manual adjustments due to what I see as a pretty big red flag. I devalue production that I deem to be somewhat fraudulent. You're better equipped to talk about this than I am, so I'll let you do that. But here's the stat: last year, he led all Power Five wide receivers in fantasy points per game. If you remove screens and deep slot targets, so slot fades, he falls all the way down to 19th. It was like a little Twitter thread I did on that. You can check that out. But basically, it's just this is lesser production. This is borderline fraudulent production. This is production we should devalue. I devalue in my model. And after factoring that in, like however much I decided to penalize him for this is pretty arbitrary. And I do still really like him. I think he's freakish after the catch, best in the class by missed tackles forced per reception across his career. But he does have that one red flag. Ultimately, for me, wide receiver 2 in the class, but it's pretty close. And then a tier gap in between him and the next wide receiver we'll discuss.
Oh, interesting. I assumed you had a top three for a tier, and you have a top two, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, Neighbors falls on my board as my wide receiver three. Um, that's not an insult, by the way. That's not a slight. People are going to take it that way. That's not how I feel. Pros though, real quick, he has modern NFL size. When you look at the best receivers in the league right now, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nakua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, they're basically all the same size, give or take an inch of height, but weight, length, they're all incredibly similar sized. It's actually kind of weird. This is the new modern NFL receiver, and I think the reason for that is with how complex route trees are in the NFL now. The NFL has really prioritized that short area quickness, right? That change of direction skill. You see it with Neighbors. That's his calling card. He can change directions better than anyone in this class easily. When you look at how explosive he is on top of that, that's a huge win, right? So this is a guy who can not only change directions really fast, but he's insanely explosive. He can absolutely fly. He can jump out of the gym. He's potential to be a great route runner. We already talked about the movement skills, but when you talk about flexibility, loose hips, loose ankles, the ability to sink and explode, the ability to, he's starting to develop some of these, I would call salesmanship type opportunities where he's using head feints and shoulder fakes and jab steps and hezzies to really sell his routes. He got better at that actually as the season went on. So I do think there's potential for him to be an excellent route runner. And you already mentioned it, Scott, but he is a rack demon, run after catch, just God. He is absolutely insane with the ball in his hands. Most of his big plays came on run after catch or contested situations downfield, eerily similar to my comp for him, which we'll get into later, but that's where he really, really wins. He isn't winning necessarily with route running yet, but he wins after the catch, wins contested. He's exceptional at both those things. Some of the concerns I have though, Scott, you brought up the production profile. I'm going to go through it real quick. You mentioned those deep slot targets, and why that is important is because in college football, you overwhelmingly get a lot of too high coverage shells, specifically quarters coverage. This is common across the entire FBS landscape. There isn't just one team that does a lot. Every team uses quarters a lot. And so what ultimately happens is that safety on the play side of where Malik Nabers is lined up, he is inevitably going to be one-on-one with Malik Nabers in the slot, and Nabers is going to have free access into the second level, and he's going to be able to set up that safety on a two-way go where he's going to be on, his heels, flat-footed, kind of just pissing his pants, waiting for Malik Nabers to bust a corner route, a post, or just run right by him. And that's ultimately what happens. We've seen similar production profiles in guys like Tutu Atwell and Wandale Robinson and Elijah Moore. The one that has worked out so far, though, Scott, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was also used a lot that way. I It just gives me a little cause for concern. Now, I don't want to kill Nabers because a lot of my cons for him are simply just things that LSU didn't ask him to do. So it's not like we don't know that he can't do it. He just wasn't asked to go out on the outside and win 1-versus-1 against an outside corner a lot. He wasn't really asked to go beat press. It doesn't mean he can't do it. It just, when I know Marvin Harrison Jr. can do it and I know Rome Odunze can do it, I tilt those guys a little bit more favorably, and we just haven't seen him do it. The other thing is he just wasn't asked to run a big route tree at the college level. A lot of screens, as you mentioned, a lot of just straight vertical stuff from the slot. Wasn't a lot of nuance what he was doing. You don't see him set up and run like a dig route off of a dagger concept. You don't see that often. You don't see a ton of crossing route type stuff. So I would like to see a more diverse route tree. I think the thing is, though, he has all the traits to be an exceptional receiver at the next level. So that said, Scott, he is your wide receiver 2. He's my wide receiver 3. You feeling good about picking him at 105 if that's where you're picking?
Yeah. Again, let me just go back to like what this red flag was. It's screens are basically manufactured production. They're layup targets. Like the expected
Yep.
catch rate on that is like 95%. It's also easier to rack up yards after the catch or force missed tackles, specifically on screens. Um, Honestly, viewing that as a target as opposed to like a handoff, there's no real fundamental difference in my mind. But the important point there is you're not being asked to route up a
Right.
cornerback to beat a high level cornerback with your route running. And that's also true to an extent with the slot fade. Brett, you and I have talked a lot about this behind the scenes, but like having a speedy wide receiver just running slot fades at the college level is basically like an efficiency cheat code. Like
Mhm.
if you have a guy athletic enough, all college offensive coordinators should be like spamming that cheat code, and that kind of like speaks more onto the offensive coordinator than the wide receiver. And like the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of my model's biggest misses over the years were players who had similar concerns. Um, Elijah Moore, Traylon Burks, Jamison Williams, Tutu Atwell, Devin Duvernay, um, Jalen Hyatt, all guys who, just basically exploited that one efficiency loophole and had a high number of screens. But this isn't saying Malik Nabers can't do it.
Mhm.
He was also very efficient on the outside, not really as close as Marvin Harrison Jr., who also bested him in the slot, but certainly very good. Um, and the fact that he did rack up so much production and was so efficient at forcing missed tackles on screens, that doesn't not mean anything. Um, but like it's certainly the case that he's not going to be this insane god on the deep on the slot fade in the pros, because that just doesn't exist in the pros because of the more narrow hash marks. But yeah, I figured you could kind of speak to this better than I can. So, is there anything I just said that you would disagree with?
No, other than you called Jameson Williams a miss. I don't think we know that yet, but, that's a different conversation for a different
I think
episode,
we
Scott,
know it,
but
but okay.
yeah, no, he looked great at the end of last year. Well,
Has
we
he ever had more than 60 yards in his, what, 25 career games?
I think he did in a game or 2 last year, but anyways,
On
I
one catch, I think.
digress. Like I said, we'll debate that on a different show, Scott. But for now,
Okay.
no, I think everything you said is true. The wide hashes in college football have made this an exploit that every good team is using. Like you said, I went through a list of players, you went through a list of players. All those teams, all those guys play on big time programs, right? So like this is where all the best offensive coordinators are, and it's just what's happening across college football. So it's something we got to adjust for a little bit. Like I said, I'm not killing Neighbors for it just because LSU exploited this over and over and over, but you do wonder about the development. Is he completely ready to run NFL routes? Definitely has the skill set to do it. It just might take a really good training camp to get him ready. Either way, I think he's probably going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL. I have no issue with that either. I think he's an exceptional player.
So the question I'll ask you is, let's say your choices are Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors plus a round two rookie pick. Because if you're talking in the NFL mock draft cognoscenti, the Lance Zierleins, Dane Bruglers, Daniel Jeremiahs of the world, it really seems like NFL teams are pretty torn on who the wide receiver one in this class is. Where a lot of teams have Neighbors. So for you, you would much rather just go with the next AJ Green, Marvin Harrison Jr., rather than take the value on a trade down.
No, I think and we're doing this trade down thing again, but I think I would probably capture that value. I think as much as I love Harrison, I do think he's the clear cut guy. At the end of the day, it's still a probability equation, right? So if I get Neighbors, who's still a great prospect, plus a swing at a second round pick, which could turn into Amon Ross St. Brown or Puka Nakua, yeah, I'm going to take that all day, man. I think that's where the value is. So, gun to my head, that's what I would pick. All right, so Scott, I got a quick comp for Neighbors, and this one's gonna blow your minds, right? Because he wore an LSU helmet as well, and that is Jamar Chase. Now, listen, Jamar Chase didn't win the same way he at LSU. He didn't play in the slot that much. He was an outside guy, but the things they're really good at, the explosive plays from run after catch, the contested stuff downfield, that all is eerily similar. They're virtually the same exact size. I do think Neighbors like the traits he displays to win are similar to Jamar Chase. And I said the same thing about Jamar Chase back coming out of LSU is that he needed to work on his route running as well. And he has done that, and he's done a good job of that. So,
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I think now I want to move Neighbors up to wide receiver one, because
well,
I told you when Jamar Chase is coming out, this is the only ever perfect prospect I've ever seen, which is still the case. The
that's
best
not
wide
the
receiver
case.
prospect of the past decade, and you were trying to poke holes in it. And so, if he's, if Neighbors is Jamar Chase 2.0, I want everything to do with that.
Well, two things you got to know about that though. I don't do ceiling floor comps. I'm just doing style comp. I just see Jamar Chase when I watch Malik Neighbors, but also like Scott. Jamar Chase was my wide receiver one that year. So I'm just, you know what? I'm just happy that I finally gave you a comp that you got excited about. I think every comp I've given, you're like, oh, cool. I'm moving that guy down now, except for maybe Marv Harrison Jr. But I'm glad I got a comp that gets you excited. That's cool.
Right.